You can't lead without demonstrating skill in the area that you work. I can't just read about it or talk about vibe coding. I actually have to do it. You have that growth mindset. It's like, oh, okay, cool. We're all ground zero today. How do I, step in and get there? You have to just do it. I like to work with people who have that same attitude, sort of push me and challenge me to keep going.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Ascend podcast. Today I'm joined by Lindsey Simon, longtime friend and engineering leader. Lindsey previously worked and was early at Google's App Engine back in 2007 and was later recruited by Brett Taylor to join Quip. Today, as VP of Engineering at Vercel, he's thinking deeply about how AI is changing engineering, developer workflows, and the future of building software. Lindsey, thanks so much for joining today.
It's nice to see you, Annie.
So first off, you had a unique path in college. You went to UT and you studied philosophy, English, and physics. How has that combo been helpful for you as an engineering leader?
I was in a program called Plan 2 from University of Texas at Austin, and their purpose with this was, Plan 1 was you take a core curriculum for like a year, and then you specialize very quickly. Plan 2 was meant to be that you never actually did too much specialization. So it was a very generalized kind of program. And I had the pleasure of going back and talking to one of my favorite professors, my math teacher, Dr. Starbird. And he actually has been working on a series of books about what he calls effective thinking, almost as a little bit of a throwaway to what we sometimes say critical thinking. And his purpose is to really focus on effective thinking, where the goals of effective thinking are really about how to, prove things correct or not, what you learn along the way. But it's the how. It's not the answers that turn out to be so important. It's the how you get there part and getting good at that. Because if you can become good at that, then, the idea is you can then do anything, be it math, be it physics, be it French, be it, computer science. And it so happened that I got into computer science after college primarily. I took one class in school just out of curiosity and interest, but it was about, it was in Java and it was boring. And I don't think it influenced me very heavily. Because the first thing that really influenced me, I had a Commodore as a kid, so I had done programming in BASIC and stuff. But really, once I had a command line, all bets were off. Things changed. And I read the GNU Manifesto, and I was hooked. And the GNU Manifesto connects to a lot of principles of philosophy. Like what are you going to do? And even American pragmatism. What are you going to do with your life that matters? As I've gotten older and had a kid and tried to be like, oh, what am I going to do? And if I'm not doing something with her, I'd better do something that matters. And how do I know if I'm doing something that matters? So again, you get back to effective thinking or ways of challenging yourself and knowing, that's always been, I think that's a challenge for everybody.
As a VP of engineering at a hyperscaler, are you using those principles in your management day to day?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of what I think the function of management is unblocking. Some of it, there's the synonym of management and leadership, and I try to disconnect those every chance I get. There are times where I try to lead by either from experience or because I have a vision for something that I want to see come true. But then a lot of what my job is to do is to make sure that people can lead other initiatives, unblock them, help do things that they make sure they're spending their time most effectively.
I think there's this idea of what management is, and then you realize what management actually is. And it's a lot harder and it's a lot less fun than I think people originally think. So I want to shift gears a little bit to Vercel. So
sure.
You joined Vercel in about 2020. There was a pretty small team at that point. I think it was Series A or leading into the Series B.
Series A.
It was Series A. Since you've joined, it's scaled tremendously. What's the hardest part of scaling 10x that no one really warned you about?
Yeah, in small companies, everything kind of by osmosis. You're always all in the room. The reactivity and the signals coming in and going out, you really can, be on top of it. And interestingly, in an engineering team of 200, you can know everybody. That part is, under the Dunbar number, you still can know everybody, and that's great. but you cannot possibly, you know everything going on anymore. And at seven, we're over 700 now. And so, once you add an entire set of functions for which you have less experience, and there's expertise in there, and there's a lot of complexity and issues and problems happening that you can't possibly track them all. um, that is the hardest thing. And at 10,000 people, when I was at Google, that was implicit. Like, it was just baked in. You were never going to do that anyway. But watching people go through the experience of being very comfortable knowing everything to becoming uncomfortable with not being able to know everything, is part of the journey. There's a fun, and then of course there's things that you can know ahead of time, but really it's everybody collectively going through that experience. The old guard experiencing what happens during that process is, you have to be in it. There is no way to explain it because it's unique to the company, the people. It's not a generalized thing.
At Quip, you were working with Brett Taylor. At Vercel, you're working with Guillermo, two incredible leaders. How have they led through some of those processes? Like, what are the best things that they did from the top down for the rest of the leadership team to follow? Is there any patterns that you've come across?
When I worked with Brett, I mean, I was lured in a sense, and not because Brett was, luring me, but I was allured with the idea that I was going to work very closely with him and get to, osmotically see what made him tick by the time we were working at Quip. And the thing that I took away from it was, both incredibly frustrating initially, and then a real, observation, which was that Brett could make decisions incredibly quickly.
Hmm.
And you're not always right. He didn't need all the context to make a decision. And initially I sort of struggled with that experience trying to build something with him because I was looking for principles, or you come out like, oh, okay, you want first principles for decisions so that you can make better decisions later. But that wasn't the case. It was just, well, here's the decision. And you know what, the guy bats pretty high average. So if you can do both of those things, you can move really quickly, especially when you're setting direction for large groups of people by making those decisions. So I think Brett is probably one of those people in the world who is, just uncommonly good at doing that. Um, and so, yeah, and Guillermo does something, he does it every day. I mean, he is faced with the same challenge of, I've seen him go from being able to know everything to, certainly, he can't today. And he's better than almost anyone. He's able to scan and know a great many things, but of course he has to be able to make decisions without complete information all of the time. And that is a true, that is a founder requirement. You have to be able to do that.
I want to transition a little bit, obviously, in the AI era and you being right in the heart of it. You've talked before about making code bases vibe codable. What does that actually look like in practice to you?
A code base that starts today, if you spin it up in Claude or Codex, it may or may not be vibe codable. What I think of to make but it's certainly going to be more vibe codable than something written 5 years ago by humans, generally speaking, but not necessarily. I think the things that make working with agents more effective, are having certain pieces built in to the code base to, make sure that, okay, after every change, there's some kind of check phase that, I mean, a classic example, make sure the code is type safe, or it runs through the TypeScript compiler, or if you're in Go, it compiles. That's a pretty basic form, but doing that consumes time. So what you want to make the feeling of coding feel fluent, I mean, the premise of vibe coding to me is that you feel like you're in the flow. And there are things that can really slow you down there that, don't feel good. Certainly a long compilation phase, a slow TypeScript checker, you have to spend a Docker image up for 20 minutes and wait. It's just not good. And the premise of Vercel was always something, you're writing configurations over and over. The premise of Vercel was like a zero config environment where things would work well. You're kind of in what we call the pit of success. And so to do that with agents, you need to have guardrails in place for those agents to check themselves, and also to check that the intent of what you're trying to accomplish is done. And the more you can automate that veracity and make it fast, the more vibe codable, I'd say, a chunk of a repository or a part of the code base would be.
You said the cost of test-driven development has fallen to zero while the value has actually skyrocketed. How do AI-driven test loops work at Vercel on like a day-to-day basis?
I think this kind of gets at what the role of the software engineer becomes going forward. And again, being able to clearly express your intent and what success and failure looks like. That's really what a test is, right? But if you do that first, you've really set up an agent, or coding agent in particular, to succeed and move
Mm.
quickly. So when doing that, so I mean, it used to, a lot of times people think of testing as, oh, I write the code and then you write the tests. And of course, test driven development is the other way around. It's where you write the success and fail criteria, and then the code is an afterthought in some way. It's the means to the end, and you start with the ends. And so the better software engineers will know how to express those ends and evaluate those means, because agents will, they're not going to always come up with the best means along the way to get to the end that you've described, especially if you've described the end in a really unclear way. They can achieve that end, but at the cost of taking some unfortunate shortcuts, or poor design decisions. So better engineers will know how to express that, and that means knowing how these systems should work ahead of time and having familiarity with them, because otherwise that is the value of experience here.
As an engineering leader, do you let the candidates use AI in interviews? And if so, how has that changed what a great hire looks like to you today?
Yeah, and, not only, it is, it's I think it's useful to see both sides of the equation, but what I'm looking for hasn't changed. I'm looking for someone who can exhibit effective thinking. Um, and I also do care about, can you do that in, with an agent? I don't think software engineering without AI it's not a viable idea. It's just not real. And it's kind of like in the old days, we'd say like, oh, can you look things up in Google during a software interview? I mean, there are people who are like, absolutely not. And I think that's like testing somebody's ability to do calculus without letting them use a calculator. That's not what you're looking for. Is somebody who'd be a great comrade, who exhibits exceptional ownership, who has a track record of doing things and following through and understanding the impact on the business they've been at, not just someone who is a good craftsman at writing code.
And has AI risen or raised the bar, excuse me, has AI
Mm.
raised the bar on what like good looks like, or how do you define excellence on your team today?
I think it's the same. I still come back to excellence is, deep understanding, commitment, ownership, um, an understanding of the context and the business that they're working in, and why how to evaluate their work. I think again, the art of just coding on its own used to be a little more noble than it is now in some senses. Like, there are people who, oh, okay, you really understand Strostrup's interpretations of how to write effective C++. I mean, there was a whole world of what we called readability at Google, which was that you had to understand what human readable code should look like so that you could enforce that during code review. And I mean, that certainly is dead. Human readable code is important to an extent, but not to the extent it was pre AI. So again, I look for people who have, with and without AI, demonstrated ownership, can tell me why they did something and whether it worked. Knowing that something failed is just as valuable to me as knowing that something succeeded and why.
Do you use any of the principles? I mean, everyone knows the Google interview questions of the past. Do you use any of those today when you're interviewing people, just for trying to pull out critical thinking capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, the favorite. I don't think this was a Google question. It's different than the ones I asked at Google, but the questions that I tend to just go to are questions that are old, like '70s era Microsoft question, just changed to map up to the future. It's got a really good story behind it, and then I collaborate with someone and talk about their approaches and things I look for there. And in the realm of effective thinking is, okay, how do you break the problem down? What questions do you ask? How many things do you figure out before you start coding, so that the act of coding is the implementation of the ideas you've already come up with. Some people don't think first, code second. I mean, I have known people to just think in code, and I do look for that too. I think being able to think in code is actually a valuable way of being fluent down to this symbolic logic from your thinking. But inevitably, you're going to work with other people, so being able to talk and do the reasoning first and validate these things with me during an interview or your colleagues at work before you just send them a PR, it can be something that you can get better at, and that you should practice. I think interviewers look for different things. That's what I look for.
With code being so easy to create today, like what has become the bottleneck? Is there a new bottleneck that you're experiencing amongst your team or that your peers are experiencing at other companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a plethora of just code coming out. It's kind of like, oh, once there were digital cameras, surely there were more pictures. Um, you know, and I think that there's just character numerically, there's just a lot more code being produced. So that does create a challenge when early on, I think our idea was, oh, we'll use AI to write all the code and then humans will verify it somehow. Like that the act of being an engineer was really being a code reviewer. I don't think it's just that you will read every line of code, though it is a good, we're still in a phase where I think there's a lot of value to reading the code effectively. But it isn't wrote line by line looking for bugs so much as looking for patterns, looking for and also using agents to answer questions that you have about the code as you read it. Knowing how to move quickly, and that is pretty important. So I think that becomes a slightly different skill than what it used to be. And the skills are changing.
So,
I mean, the skills of a software engineer and of a manager are certainly changing.
and I know you do quite a bit of angel investing and you have for years. Like, is there something that you're looking for? I mean, I have to ask coming from a venture firm, but is there something that you're
Yeah.
looking for that you're like, the market's missing this category?
No, I'm not so sophisticated. I look for people that I think are really committed, and then ideas where I believe I have intuition. Um, and that usually separates out a lot of things. Like I'm a very minor, small fry in terms of the breadth of things I would invest in because of that. Because I don't have intuition for everything or for markets. I have intuition for developer tools. I have intuition for design tools, things in the very much like in the product engineer space. Um, and I feel like you kind of know it when you see it if you're going off of intuition, but usually it's people who I have already established have a really good track record. Like I've known them for a
Yeah.
while. I've seen them operate for a while. Maybe that'll change in time because I am very, excited about the new grads cohorts, and the thinking of that I see from people without that depth of experience. But what I am seeing, even from the new grad cohorts, are they've been building since they were in elementary or high school. They've been doing this already, so they actually do have that track record. It's kind of mind blowing, and so I love that.
And you've got your experience from, Google in 2007, which is still incredibly early, for the App Engine when things were just exploding, and Vercel in 2020, as I mentioned, when it's like 15 people. Is that right?
Yeah,
Um,
engineers.
could you could you tell that these were rocket ships, or like what do you look back in hindsight that you were like, wow, that how do you spot that trend?
Yeah, I don't know. I what I knew was in both cases, I was scared and excited by the technology personally, like so much so that I couldn't look away from it. I thought it was innovative and necessary for myself. I could do more with it personally. And then when I'd look around, what I'd say is you see almost an unfair level of love around for the brand somehow. And far beyond the actual like state of the development of the tool at the time. um I think people could see where it was going right away, and they were already bought in and excited. And I've seen a few examples of this, but myself, I bought a pro Vercel account before I certainly needed one, and it was because I felt like I wanted this thing to exist. I think when we buy services, we're kind of investing, right? You're voting with your wallet, and I had voted with my wallet. In fact, that was one of the criteria I had for what was I going to do next after Quip. I wanted to go somewhere where I had already voted with my wallet, not where I wanted to put chips down for my next job. I wanted to go do something that I already clearly believed in. So it was like my process involved looking at one password, where had I built accounts that I paid for? And so it was kind of a gut check. It wasn't the only thing I considered, but when it came down to it, I wanted that to be, I thought that would be important. And it was in this case. I actually came to Vercel because I had an amazing customer support experience that was so
Oh, interesting.
dumbfounding that I was convinced that the company must be, must have some kind of black magic under it that was doing something that seemed inevitable, which was like a form of customer support that involved not, email back and forth and, case numbers and, hey, we'll get back to you within 48 hours. It was like somebody just started pushing code to my open source project to debug it for me without my, consent or permission or whatever, because it's an open source project. So it was actually a very personalized, novel way to explore the problem, because they actually cared about the build system themselves and wanted to understand what edge case I was hitting. And so it was a convenient way to do it. And so, I had thought no one got my email, and instead I got a pull request, notification. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I could see the diff and the build log on Vercel. And I was like, okay, I have to work there. Whatever they're doing, whatever's in the water, I want to work there.
Now, was that support person Guillermo? Was he the one actually, or was it?
I mean, it's the spirit of Guillermo, right? So that's the thing, is that those kind of it was a guy named Paolo Dimitri, actually, who became an engineer on the team after. But no, but again, I think that's founder spirit. That is a kind of, we have a value at the company called dig deep, and it is that you don't just skim the surface when you're solving problems. You really try to truly understand them. And this is an example of a customer support engineer digging deep into my problem, out of passion for the product itself, really. And so I think that is founder spirit coming through.
I want to transition a little bit more to your career. So your career really hasn't had a linear path. Like, you were an IC, then you went to leadership, then back to an IC at Google, then back to leadership. Anything that you learned from these like lateral moves along the way?
I don't care about titles, or to some extent, the role is the thing, that you have sort of a responsibility baked in. Like, my role as a manager is to unblock and help my team succeed. It's the sum is greater than the individual parts of what I might do myself, generally. But that doesn't mean that I'm not also an IC. It doesn't mean I'm not also customer support engineer. It doesn't mean I'm not also doing sales. I think the fluidity of what you do and your ability to be fluid is how you just become better at working with other people and adding value. I just wanted to add value. When I joined Vercel, actually, Shoma made me a product. He said, you were going to do product. He didn't call it product management. It was just product. But I knew that basically meant code wouldn't be my primary leverage. But it wasn't that I didn't write code. And I think for managers going forward, or leaders, that you can't lead without demonstrating skill in the area that you work in. So, I've been programming a lot more in the last 6 months because what it means to be a programmer has changed so much. I have to know what that means by doing it. I can't just read about it or talk about vibe coding. I actually have to do it. And that is incredibly valuable, and it's exciting to me. Like, I don't, if you accept that that change is part of your life, and that's the growth, you have that growth mindset. Is like, oh, okay, cool, we're all ground zero today. How do I, step in and get there? You have to just do it. And so I like to work with people who have that same attitude, sort of push me, and challenge me to keep going. I mean, our CTO, I remember getting really excited last year once LLMs were starting to get pretty good about some of the things you could try to automate with them. He's like, well, you just have to try it. Like, do it, try asking it to do unreasonable things and see if what happens. And until you feel that you can do that, again, like the command line, you could just type things and hit enter, see what they do. It's very freeing, and it's incredibly exhilarating. And it also helps you relate. I mean, you can't talk to software engineers as a people manager and expect them to have a great deal of respect if you haven't been in the trenches and you aren't in the trenches with them doing it.
You didn't have the traditional CS degree that became mandatory at one point. Now everyone who's graduating, like, what advice do you give them on finding their first role, especially if they want a career path like yours?
Well, I don't think they necessarily want a career path like mine. Again, like, you have to, go through a lot of ups and downs. Maybe you just want the straight up one, right? But accept that that probably is not how it's going to look. And so if you do accept that a good outcome might have dips, like real dips that are hard to go through. If you accept that, then what you optimize for instead is doing things that matter to you. Like, how do you know if they matter to you? Well, that that's the thing. That's the journey. What matters to you is hard to figure out when you're young, I think, sometimes, depending on your background. But when you do find things that matter to you, keep pulling that thread. My sort of advice I would give to a lot of people is, like, build something for stakeholders who are not into technology but need something to work. And if you've ever done consulting, you've done this already as a profession. And so I think I learned a lot doing that as a profession, because they don't care whether your TypeScript compiles or whether you're using modern practices. They care that the thing that they need to do works reliably and it saves them time. And again, that goes back to the GNU Manifesto for me. That's what was so compelling, is if I wasn't going to be a doctor, obviously, coming out of school, but what could I do that people would appreciate in their lives, and add value for them, and I would feel good by that. I mean, I think most of us do. So if you can save somebody time on something that takes them 20 minutes, if you can make that 10 seconds, I mean, you've made their experience better. But they care that it's reliable and that it actually saves them time. So, you need a stakeholder who's like your parent or your grandma or your neighbor, somebody who's close enough to poke you in the eye, and also who, will need the thing you're building, not just something that you want to build that's fun, that you want to post on X. That's good too. But if you haven't done something that mattered, it's tough. And I also usually tell people looking for jobs to do the same thing with the companies they're reaching out to. I mean, I get 5,000 applications for an internship. What works better than your typical application of things you're good at? It's tell me what's broken on Vercel that you as a user have used that you're going to come in and fix. The market, it's harder, but, like, you have to personalize. Your resume should not be a static document. It should be a thing. Like, you should send me your resume for why you're going to make a difference at Vercel, and evidence that you've made a difference in the past, and something that you really care about that we don't do well. So I think that burden is hard for people looking for jobs, but I'm not looking for people who want a job. I'm looking for people who want a mission and already feel the power of that mission.
So you hit on a point that I think is interesting. It's that linear path. I think everyone, especially when recent college grads, always feel like the path goes like this, and then all of us that have some maybe gray hairs and battle scars know that it's a lot of lumps to get to where you want to go. Any lessons you've learned from failures in the past?
Yeah, you have to keep trying. I mean, there was a moment, I'd say, where I was kind of, I wasn't feeling too good about a certain, state of choices I'd made and the outcomes I was in. And I walked by somebody's desk with the a sort of meme level cheesy, mantra on the photo that was don't look back because you're not going that way. And it just hit me so hard and it was so good. Um, and I think that's actually, it's valuable to understand the past. But if you are lamenting decisions, you're not going to, necessarily strive forward. And you can't predict success exactly. But I've learned a lot in situations that didn't succeed. And I think you can have certain guardrails for yourself too. Like, okay, I'm gonna do this for N years at least, demonstrate, be committed and have some criteria to evaluate this in a few years and decide if this is the right thing to be doing.
And I think especially anytime you're doing anything that remotely touches early stage, it is a roller coaster and
Yeah.
you're on for the ride, the ups and the downs, and you have to take
Yep.
it. So my final question, I know you've got to run. So
Yep.
uh knowing you from years, and a funny story, I thought about this the other day when we used to work together. It was like after some event that our company was doing, and you had a guitar in the office, and I used to play guitar when I was little, and you got me back into playing. You said you're like just relearn the power chords. That's all you
Yeah.
need. Uh, so that actually got me back into playing guitar, thanks to you. But you write music, you write code. How does one inform the other?
Yeah, no, I mean, they exercise different parts of your brain in ways. Like I like, you know, music for me is a way to, you don't know where you're going, but you're just trying to go. You sit down, you just start playing, and you don't know where it's going to go, and then you find a pattern you like, that works for you, and then you see if you can develop more patterns around that pattern that are also harmonically interesting, or words that you know express something you wanted to express. It is more. Paul Graham's talked about how code is an incredibly creative and artistic endeavor. And so programming and building things has a lot, it does scratch a lot of the same itch. But it is different in that, for me, sometimes historically programming was like the realization of logic, instant feedback, like endorphins, it works or it doesn't. Um, but I don't know. I feel like music kind of does something. I know if it works or it doesn't for me pretty quickly, and so you either move on or you stick to it. And I think there's something connected about that. There's a history of. I remember reading about that IBM used to go after people who'd studied music in school as a way to build more programmers at a time where there weren't enough programmers. Because I think that idea of symbolic logic, written music translated into sound, and code translated into products is an analogy you could make there.
Do you think with the proliferation of AI in engineering, do you think that's going to make people more creative because it's just accessible?
I believe that it will. When I see the delight of somebody, I sat next to somebody on a plane who had never seen V0, but was doing like business development. And I had them tell me their idea. They were reluctant to tell me their idea at first because they're like, I don't want anyone to steal it. I'm like, okay, don't worry about that. I'm pretty committed. I've got my path. But like watching them delight at this thing that could get visualized, that was their idea, and the amount of effort it would take to visualize it 2 years ago, you'd hire an agency, you might hire a creative you can be that. I love the sort of opening up of that possibility, and so I love to see artistic creations done in V0 or by people with access to AI tools.
Well, Lindsey, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been awesome. It's always great to see you, and then always great to catch up. And now you have so many words of wisdom.